part of this Black Lives Matter Social Justice and Advocacy Team Series event. And I will hand it over. Is Dr. Quezada on the call? All right, well then, Dr. Lathan, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you. I want to say thank you to all of you who taken time, as Dr. Jez, to join us for this Black Lives Matter, very important topic, anti-racism, challenging us to reflect, to go deeper, to even be bold enough to have dialogue that will impact change. And I just really want to first and foremost give a special shout out to these group of students and faculty who have really went above and beyond to what I would say to the art of praxis, in which we are not only talking about equality, social justice, but we're actually learning and actually putting into action things that really reflect the work that we say that we do. And just the collective efforts and this topic of how big it is, we look at the new deliberation of the court systems, in which we still see injustice at a high level that has upset so many people across this country and continues to impact us in ways that even if you try not to be involved, it's hard not to be involved. And it's a reflection on our society. We see people being pulled into division to choose a side. And in America, why are we choosing sides? And when we say that this was built for all of us? And why do we have a leadership that puts us in these positions to choose sides? So this work is real serious, guys. This election is real serious, as we know. Everything that's coming to a head of what we say as students, as people of society, as people who says that we want to make a difference, if we don't have take an opportunity to voice our opinions through action, we will we're in trouble big time. And we can feel the tension. We can feel how high that people anxiety level, mental illness, all of these things is being reflected under so many different umbrellas, and racism seems to be picking up and having more steam than it has in years before. So I just want to say thank you again, and I'm glad to be a part, and I'm here away in Detroit, Michigan, my home, and I'm able to spend some time with some family, but I could not miss the time moving some things around just to say thank you, and I really welcome all of you that came, and let's learn and have some fun. All right? Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Jez.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to say I absolutely agree, and I'd also like to say Breonna Taylor's name, because she is one of the reasons why we are doing this work and coming together. And with the news that came out just a few days ago, I think a lot of us have been greatly impacted. So these types of conversations and people coming together is really important. I had a friend who posted, if you ever wondered what you would have done in the 1960s, you're doing it today. And so just by showing up today, it is a very important and very beautiful step forward. So I just wanted to go over the, if you wouldn't mind moving the slide forward a little bit. I just wanted to go over the agenda. So we had our opening remarks, and we're going to go over the digital chalkboard and other resources. We have a wonderful speaker, Reymundo Quezada, who's here, and he's going to talk to us about some of his anti-racism work. We're going to move out into the breakout rooms. I had sent you some discussion questions before. Hopefully that was helpful to get you to start thinking a little bit deeper about some of the readings that we had offered. So we'll explain the norms, and then we'll get into the breakout rooms. Then we'll come back together to talk about action steps and moving forward. This is really speaking to what our solidarity statement and action plan is all about, that we weren't just putting our words out there, but that we're actually putting movement and actions to really do what we can to change the world. We're going to have some closing remarks, and then we'll have some announcements for our next event. So I will hand it off to Maisha.
You got to unmute yourself, Maisha.
I got it. Thank you, Dr. Latham. My name is Maisha Wiggum, and I'm a second-year PhD student in education for social justice. I'd like to share this resource guide designed for schools and school districts. We imagine it as a jumping-off point for professional development about issues of equity, justice, and anti-Blackness. Inside, you'll find sources and readings to help us better understand and support Black youth. These resources can be used for ongoing professional development for teachers, book clubs, with teacher leadership teams, and as part of new teacher mentoring, and with administrative teams as they are creating new ways to support Black youth in our schools. So as you'll see, the first two sources are co-authored by our own Dr. Spencer, a resource guide for schools and districts addressing racism in the education system. We also have resources for teaching about racism and police violence. The third resource is co-created by Michelle Coleman, myself, and Raquetta Odrego Thomas, two other African-American women that want to write about social justice issues. Our first blog is about anti-Blackness, and the link provided to you on this slide will take you to our blog. The fourth resource is uplifting our USD racism and anti-racism voices by responding to prompts and viewing the digital chalkboard. So when you break out into breakout rooms, please take some time to review the resources provided on this slide. And I will turn it over to Dr. Quezada.
Great, thank you, Maisha. Thank you, everyone. So on behalf of the Department of Learning and Teaching, again, want to thank everyone for being here and participating and keeping up with the different events that the committee has put forth. So it's a great, I guess, honor in a sense to introduce our speaker, keynote speaker, Reymundo R, aka as Mundo as well. He's the chair of Ethnic, Gender, and Social Justice Department for Grossmont Community College. It's a new, they just renamed their department, so integrated social justice in it. The department itself houses Chicano X, Africana, American Indian, and gender studies within the department. Reymundo earned his BA in history from the University of San Diego, so he's an alumni back in 2010. Received his master's in social science from Cal State San Bernardino up in the Inland Empire. Again, he teaches courses in sociology, race and ethnic studies, Chicano history at the community college, and actually also at Helix High School as part of their dual enrollment. So he's out in the trenches with high school students as well for the last 3 years as a faculty member, and even before that as an adjunct. He works a lot with professional human resources, professional development training, creating curriculum, working with faculty and staff, particularly addressing systemic racism within the community college, or with the state and community as well. Again, he's also was just recently appointed as a representative from Grossmont Community College to University of Southern California's or USC's Race and Equity Center here locally, so he's working with them as well. He works a lot with first-year experience programs, first-generation college students as part of his service within the community as well. And as I mentioned, teaches at Helix High School. His interest in terms of research looks at using data, again, to create and implement culturally relevant pedagogy and education within the community college system in terms of the different curriculum. Most recently, Reymundo just had an opportunity to actually do a lecture for the California Community College system with their faculty development program on a topic, I think it was last week. I dropped in for a few minutes on Africana, Latinidad, Black and Latinx lives, intersectionality, partnerships and resiliency. And then earlier, about a month ago, on a lecture on creating criminal minds, the American backlash to protest movements, to California state attorneys as part of their professional development licensure. But with that, I think, but most important, probably in case you haven't figured out, I introduced to you my son, Reymundo, mi hijo. Reymundo, whose mother, Cynthia, is also a retired educator. His sister, Christine, is also an education counselor at Eje Academies for Social Justice Charter School. And again, so we're very proud of, for all his professional accomplishments and for being that social justice warrior that never gives up and who never stays quiet. Sometimes it gets him in trouble, but he doesn't stay quiet on issues pertaining to social justice and access to education, with specifically focusing on ethnic minority and underserved populations. And with that, I introduce you to Reymundo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dad, Dr. Quezada. I don't know how to address him right now. I'll do both, but thank you for that introduction. One thing I thought of really quickly is when he introduced the new name of our department, because cross-cultural studies is something from like the 1970s, as I'm sure you all know. We are an ethnic studies department over at Grossmont College, but we wanted to keep up with the terminology that is constantly used in academia. And when he said AIM social justice studies, we put that on there for a couple reasons. One, we put it on there because we wanted to let everyone know that every single one of our classes will have a social justice theme, whether it is Chicanx studies, whether it is Africana studies, whether it is a new class that we just developed, Introduction to LGBTQ studies, which is I think we're one of 4 California community colleges that even offer that class in the state of California, or will be offering that class. But when we took this, the community college is so filled with bureaucracy, we had to take everything to the board, and there was pushback, and not surprisingly. And they said, why do you want to have social justice as a name on here, right? Are you just saying this for sort of brand recognition, right? Like we're Nike or something. And it made me realize on how specific and how concise you have to be when navigating these difficult times and these difficult waters. Luckily for us, we created a new degree called Social Justice Studies degree, and that's exactly why we had it on there. So it squashed whatever they had to say at the very beginning. So I wanted to talk a little bit today. When I was first in communication with you all, I saw that we were reading a couple articles, and the one that stood out to me was actually one that I'd already read before, and that was The End of American Racism by Dr. Kendi, who I'm sure we've read a lot of his work. And I remember when I first saw that article, I love The Atlantic. By the way, I absolutely love The Atlantic. For those of you who don't know, it was started actually in the 1850s, excuse me, as an abolitionist magazine, right? And it's still the same magazine from that. I've always loved it. I've always appreciated it. But when I read that title, the sort of, I want to say pessimist, especially recently in me, right? Can we end American racism? When I first saw it, my mind has changed now, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But when I first saw it, can we end American racism? Is this the end of American racism? My thought was absolutely not. It was no. Particularly, it might have been the sociologist in me who immediately starts to think of a theory in sociology called the fixed fallacy of racism, if you're not familiar with that, what that theory or what that fallacy is that racism never ends. It just transforms itself to meet whatever the acceptable form of racism is in that present society, right? An example of that being, if you're a football fan like myself, Richard Sherman is a cornerback for the San Francisco 49ers. He was formerly with the Seattle Seahawks. He made a great play to send his team to the Super Bowl. He gave an interview after that was very passionate, right? You should seriously go watch it on YouTube. It's like an old take from WWF where he says, never put a sorry receiver on me like that, right? And so Richard Sherman, a black man with dreadlocks that went to Stanford, from Compton, California, after he gave that interview, what you had is a lot of pundits, particularly conservative pundits, started calling him a thug. They said, why do you have to act like a little thug when you're on the field? Why do you have to act like a thug in this setting? You're going to the Super Bowl, act like you've been there before, right? And Richard Sherman, being the very smart man that he is, used the fixed fallacy of racism. And he said, this is just another way to call me the N-word. That's what you want to call me, but you can't do that openly in the media anymore. You're probably doing it behind closed doors, but this is what you were trying to call me. And I would suggest that calling someone a thug, which was used against Michael Brown, which was used against Trayvon Martin, which was used against Sandra Bland, is something that has continued to happen. And you see it happen most recently with Breonna Taylor, right? A woman who was asleep in her apartment and police barged in her door and killed her, right? And the only repercussions they faced is, as we've heard before, are for the bullets that missed her, that went into the other apartments. And so I first thought, no, that this is something that won't happen. My mind has changed, but my mind also started to turn, right? Because when we talk to people, how we look at it and no one even admits that they are racist, right? I'm not talking about in here, especially if we've read How to Be an Anti-Racist. All the data in that book shows us that we are all predisposed to have any sort of bias, whether it is gender, whether it is racial, right? Whether it is class, we are all predisposed to it, but no one even admits it. And you can look at history to show that segregationists said that they were not racist. They just said that they believed in the separation of the races, right? If you're familiar with Levittown, Pennsylvania, right? The model for the American suburbia that did not let Black folks buy in those neighborhoods. And when one did, they tried to burn the house down. Right? What did Levitt say? Right? I have the quote right here. So when I look for a second, I wanted to get this precisely right. When he said why they didn't let Black folks buy in their community, he said, but I have come to know that if you sell one house to a Negro family, then 95% of whites will move in. Or excuse me, will not move in. 95% of whites will not move in. We can either solve housing or racism, but we cannot solve both. And I think that this is the attitude that many people have had. The President of the United States currently says, I am the least racist person you've ever met. That's what he says. It is a quote from him, that he is the least racist person that any of us apparently have ever met, even though he has called Mexicans rapists, murderers, and drug dealers, even though he called for the execution of the Central Park Five, even after they were exonerated, even though he was sued by the Department of Justice for not renting to Black and Vietnamese folks. Right? And so we start to see this happen, and we see it continued. We saw it continued with the non-indictment of Breonna Taylor yesterday. I had class yesterday, and I took a moment to talk to my class, and a student asked me if I was disappointed. And as others have stated as well, I said I was not disappointed. And when I say that, sometimes people are like, why? Right? Well, because disappointment implies expectation. I think many of us expected that non-indictment. Many of us expected that to happen because we saw it happen to Trayvon Martin. We saw it happen to Tamir Rice. We saw it happen to Philando Castile. Receive no justice. I'm currently in Minneapolis. Philando Castile was executed 3 blocks from where I'm at right now. And so I think of all of these bad things, but then I start to think of what that has pushed us to do, which is to hold events like this, right? Sort of this anti-racist revolution, where you start to see institutions, you start to see individuals that start to reckon with their own bias and their own predisposed bigotry that they may have themselves. And I think that just the fact that we are in here are doing it, right? I'll get back to the unrest, or I'll get to the unrest in a second. But unfortunately, since May, we have seen support for movements like this go down. And that is what the data says. Support for Black Lives Matter in the Latino community has gone down 11%, according to Pew, which came out, I think, 2 days ago, right? In the Asian American community, it has gone down. It has stayed steady in the Black community. And that's unfortunate. And even when we have institutions that are attempting to tackle these issues, are they really tackling it, right? We see in the NFL, Colin Kaepernick, a Super Bowl starting quarterback and a multiple Pro Bowler, is still unsigned. Eric Reed, who kneeled with him, is still unsigned. What about our institutions? I can't speak for what USD is doing. It looks like you all are doing a great job, but you also have to wonder, who are the people leading this movement? It should not just, and I don't want to speak for anyone at USD, but it should not just be students and graduate students and untenured professors that are leading this sort of movement. It should be the president. It should be administration. It should be tenured faculty that have these protections to speak out. And I don't know if that's what's going on at USD. I'm not familiar with it, but I speak for my own institution itself, where some of the loudest voices are the ones with the most to lose. So how do we keep this going, right? Because we've seen uprisings. We've seen what people call riots. We've seen looting, right? And when we see this, kind of the spectacle of it all sometimes makes people look away or turns them off, which I find, again, the historian in me finds it interesting, because when I was younger, I learned that the Boston Tea Party was one of the most patriotic acts in the history of continued of the United States, the literal destruction of property. Right? I saw that the Stamp Act riots are seen as some of the most patriotic acts. In New York City, right, we talk about Alexander Hamilton now because of we've always talked about him, but because of the musical that came out on Disney Plus. One of the things that they did not talk about is that in New York City, him and his friends, right, I don't know which ones they were, but I know he was there, pulled down a statue of King George III. And that was seen as a patriotic act. And now we are being seen as anti-American for pulling down statues of people that actually fought to overthrow the United States. And so when we see this, we need to think, even with the Boston Massacre, which some people say started the Civil War a couple of years before the Declaration of Independence. You can argue that some of the themes in the Boston Massacre you could still see today, right? Because it was state violence. One of the first people killed was a Black man, Crispus Attucks. That's all we usually learn about him. But what we don't know is that those people that killed that Black man, Crispus Attucks, who was fighting for American ideals, those men got off, right? John Adams was actually their lawyer. And they got off. Why? Because John Adams did something that many people still do today, is that he, as a lawyer for the state violence, for the British, actually played into racial stereotypes of Crispus Attucks and of other people that were there. You still see this done today. Again, with Michael Brown being called a thug, with Breonna Taylor, everything that she supposedly did or didn't do came out, which, by the way, she did nothing except win awards for being an excellent EMT. And so there's all of these confusing thoughts when we come and we think about this, right? But what made me change my mind, and what maybe I want to leave you with, is that when we look at the title, The End of American Racism, it is something that is seen as impossible. It is something that is sometimes seen as crazy and improbable. So I wanted to leave us with an idea to ponder over. In 1859, Frederick Douglass was arguing for the seizure of $3 billion in private property in the form of the enslaved by calling for the abolition of slavery. People then thought it was improbable, they thought it was crazy, and they thought it was impossible. They said that it would never happen. I would suggest everyone in this Zoom meeting right now would say, not only was Frederick Douglass correct, mostly, right? Not only was he correct, but that he was in the right moral character, that he had the right moral position to call for $3 billion of back then's money to be seized, of private property to be let go. And so when I think about our future as a country, I think about the improbable, I think about the impossible, and I think about what is seen as the crazy. I hope that in future generations, hopefully sooner than later, that our children, our grandchildren, right, whoever, future generations can look back at moments like this and look at this group as abolitionists, of abolitionists to end state violence, of abolitionists of the death penalty, of the prison system as we know it, of the police system as we know it. That's what we hope that they look at us as, is the abolitionists. Because when we look at Frederick Douglass, we say, yep. And that's how I hope that they look at us. With that said, I want to thank you all. I think you all are doing great work. And just as the abolitionists did in that movement, we need to continue this movement. And we need to know that the end of American racism can happen and it will happen. And this is a strong movement to even get that conversation going. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, son. And your mom is actually looking at you as well.
Where? No, I don't. It doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time from your busy schedule. Looking forward to seeing you when you come back in October. So, Dr. Jess, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Reymundo. Jennifer, you were going to share the norms with us.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Menglikmont. I am a second-year grad student with the PhD in Education for Social Justice program here in the Department of Learning and Teaching. I would like to now prepare us to break out into smaller groups to discuss the text that we read. And in that, I offer to you, along with the co-facilitators of these breakout rooms, my dear colleagues in the program with me this year, we offer you these circle norms that were lovingly derived from our past events and also from the Conversations of Color events, the first one of which I was able to be a part of last year. And these are intentions that we hope that you carry with you in your discussions so that we can listen with intentionality, and we can offer space within our conversations to process everything that's being shared today. We ask and we hope that you feel empowered to share from your heart authentically. Please try to use I statements. And we, of course, want to respect confidentiality within our circles of discussion today. We will have 40 minutes in these small groups together. We will save 5 minutes at the end, of course, for the last question of the discussion questions. One where we can reflect on what has taken place and what has been shared today, and transform that into a sort of transformative solidarity, a collection of actions that all of us that are sharing this time and space today can commit to and support each other with. Because this work, again, is we are carrying on the legacy of those from the past, those abolitionists, those who spoke up in the face of injustice. So we will now move into these groups, and we're really excited for these discussions, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, and thank you all. So I'm about to move you into your group and feel really blessed to be able to be part of this event today and listening to these wonderful discussions. So Zulema, I think you're going to take us through the facilitation of share-outs.
Actually, for this next activity, what we're asking everyone to do is what we want to do is take the temperature of the room. Now that we've come back and we've engaged in some pretty impactful discourse, we just kind of want to see where everybody is and invite everyone to either scan the QR code on the screen or join on a link, which I believe Tommy might be able to type into the chat box. And basically what we're doing is a word cloud activity. And for those of you who aren't familiar, what it is, it's a site that prompts you to type one word. And what we want you to do is come up with one word that captures the essence of your breakout room experience. And when you type that word in, depending on the frequency in which that word pops up, you're going to see how others are feeling at this moment in real time, which is really neat. So as you can see, that words are already starting to emerge on our screen. So some folks are feeling energized and inspired and hopeful, agreement. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh yes, that's great. Thank you, Kelly. Kelly put the link in the chat box for those of us that haven't been able to jump in. Inspired. Look at the size of inspired. So we can tell a lot of people are fired up. Uplifting, humanity, disrupt. That's excellent. Oh my goodness. Energized, hopeful. Look at that. So we can look at this and feel the sense of resolve within each other and really lean on each other to keep propelling this work forward and making change happen. So there's a lot of powerful conversation and much work to be done. But, oh, I like connected. I think that's very important. I think we should, all of us should take that away from this experience and know that we are a community and that there is power in numbers, no matter how modest they are. That's great. Thank you so much for participating in that activity. And hopefully, I think there might be a way for us to capture that. As we move into this next portion, we asked all the groups to come up with one or two steps, actionable steps that we can take. So again, moving beyond just words and discussion, but backing it up with some meaningful action. So how do we leverage our talents, our positions, our connections to create change, to enact change, real change, tangible change? And so we're looking at the some of the postings that groups came up with, and we can just take a moment to see what everybody put on there. And then I am happy to take volunteers from any of the groups that are willing to share out, and I'll just call out the group numbers, and anyone that is ready and willing to share out, please just jump right in. So we'll start with group one. Group one is, if you would like to share the one or two things that you came up with, please jump right in.
Well, you know, in discussing these questions, we first want to discuss, we first talked about how racism has always existed. It's something that hasn't gone away. The veil that was put on when Obama got elected, and people assume racism is over. We elected a Black president, you know, wasn't really something that others saw. You know, for anyone who's experienced racism, a Black president being elected isn't the end of racism. Which then led to the second question. Again, removing a racist president doesn't mean racism is over. One of the things that was discussed, of course, is questioning the system that put him in place in the first place. You can't just say, let's get rid of a racist president, it's over. What about the people that got him in that position? The steps that took to get him there, the things that were normalized, you know. At his very first, wasn't something gradual. Donald Trump showed his face on the very first day when he went on the podium and announced he was going to be president, and then he went after, you know, calling Mexicans rapists, thugs, you know, some of the saying his best people, but not clearly. Not clearly. They're always saying their best. So, you know, for this to become normalized shows that there's something there, and these people that elected him aren't gonna go away after he's gone. They're gonna keep being there, you know. And we got really into heated discussion that we actually made it to like the third question. So it's, how do we discuss unity in our institution. And one of the things that we were talking about was, of course, inclusion. And, I think Alexandra mentioned, like, she's a freshman, and we had an incident this summer where someone was talking about White at USD Instagram account, and the president had to make a comment on that and send emails. And so the question is, like, why did the institution need to do that rather than just, like, what is it at the behest of the university having to cover its tracks rather than acknowledging what's going on? You don't just cover a wound with a Band-Aid. You have to do what you can to fix the situation. And so in that sense, one of the things that, based on something we've learned is the idea that, we got to be beyond just working with equality. We need to be equitable. We can't just be falling in the middle of the, of being culturally responsive. We have to do more than just being diverse. We have to include people's voices when they're willing to talk. And one of the things that we discussed too is that if you are able to speak up, some of the 3 steps that we kind of discussed, they weren't like unilateral, but these are the ideas that I got from the discussion. Was first and foremost, I acknowledge that racism is still prevalent in the United States. That reminds me of, I can't remember who on top of my head it was, but it was the idea that, racism is not uniquely American, but it's definitely ingrained in American society. Second is, if possible, utilize your platform, whether it's social media, if you're a celebrity or someone with power, mention it and talk about it, because their influence can change with whatever materials you have, whatever resources you have at your disposal. And then the third one is, of course, the idea between narratives and numbers. We don't just, some people will rely on numbers to see like what's happening, and some will need a narrative. This is something that we can not just only see in racism, but also with COVID. We have numbers here, and yet people still think it's a hoax. It's the same thing with racism. People will see numbers and still not believe that racism is out there. Some people will need narratives, and some people will hear a narrative, but at the same time will need numbers to understand that these things are real. Thank you. That's group 1.
Thank you, Adan. That was really powerful, really powerful. The power of storytelling really just humanizes the numbers, right? It brings it a dimension to it that you can't appreciate with raw quantitative data. You've got to have the other dimension. Okay, thank you so much for that. Group 2, is there anyone from group 2 that would like to speak?
I would like to thank my group members in group 2, Sherilyn, Lindy, and Dr. Lathan. We had a very soulful discussion about the state of what's happening now that we're experiencing together here. So if Lindy and Sherilyn wouldn't mind, I just want to read our sticky. We actually want to stay in touch with each other to sustain our dialogue and support each other in our work, our anti-racist work, and the types of actions that we are taking within our positions as students, and also staff members who support students and faculty here at USD, and to continue to be that person who may not always want to be the person invited to different committees and things because we're the person in the room that holds the anti-racist positionality and actually speaks up and speaks to that positionality, to be that person in the room at the table to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Super important. Thank you, group 2. That's huge. And this is the point of these events is also to build more community and strengthen our connections in this network with each other so that we become stronger and learn more about discovering what our strengths are and our talents and how we can leverage those to keep moving forward together. Okay, thank you so much for that. Group 3, do we have anybody from group 3?
Hey, this is Mario Echeverria. Shout out to my group, Emma, Maisha, Kelly, and Dr. Jez. So for group 3, we started talking a lot about how there were a lot of people who initially RSVP'd for our events and then like kind of the numbers kind of dwindled down when the actual event happened. So we're talking about how do we increase the magnitude of that moving forward. So Maisha brought up, we need like to pull in more Black voices into this space to continue collaborating, learning together, unlearning together, and like co-constructing initiatives for USD outside of whatever this is. And then we also started talking about like engaging our USD people through more social media platforms, Instagram Live, YouTube Live. That way we can like curate and create more content that people can always go back to. It's not just like a single event that is holding all the like knowledge and collaboration.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Group 3. Yes, all of those extremely important things to keep in mind, and how we remain energized and fired up to keep moving forward. And of course, how do we get more people to enter this and join us in this work? Thank you so much for that. Okay, Group 4.
Group 4 was collapsed into another group.
Group 5. I know we have someone from Group 5.
Let me unmute. Okay, so we're number 5. We're Group 5. Number 5 said no one ever, right? That we're number 5, but nonetheless, we're proud to be group number 5. Sulema, Tommy, Leah, and Kathy and myself were in group 5, and I, call out to my colleagues here to if there's things that I'm missing. We started out our conversation with really examining a little bit the metaphor of a mirror, right? That Kendi talks about. Trump's holding up a mirror and waking up portions of America, and also one of us talked about how in the article, the author says, thank you for alerting us to the truth, and was really struck by that, by this mirror that Trump was holding up. And I sort of shared that, when you look in a mirror, you see things that hopefully you like about yourself, but you see a lot of things you don't like. And so for me, the metaphor of the mirror was about kind of the perhaps unacknowledged on my part ugliness and the dangerous parts of America. And even before Trump was elected, just looking at the rallies and the energy, which was very scary for me and my family leading up to the election. And that, there are members of my family that are very connected to politics in the Democratic Party. And I remember even texting them saying, did you expect Trump to do so well? Because they had their finger on the pulse. And they were in denial. They were saying, oh, you're looking at the wrong website. You don't know what you're talking about. I mean, they said that directly, but pretty much, that I wasn't very versed in politics, which is slightly true, but I could see that something else was happening that people had not predicted. And so we had a lot of discussion about, is this my country? I haven't felt, one of our members said, I felt good about our president since Jimmy Carter, right? That's been a while. And also this powerful metaphor about cancer, the denial of cancer, and the parallel to the denial of our country and the racism that exists in our country. And the idea that you either are or are not racist, that's a choice, and it's a call for change. And will it change? We don't know. And then we talked also about, that some of us are tired. We've been doing this a long time, and, we need to be more inclusive, and we need to reach out to youth, right? And we do that at USD, but even, our teens. So I went to some rallies that were organized marvelously and in a very complicated, nuanced fashion, and they were put on by high school students, And so don't underestimate youth that bring this kind of energy and leadership, that sometimes we perhaps overlook. And then we talked about specific things that we were doing, and raised the idea of registering people to vote. Now's the time. Let's get people to vote, people of color, underrepresented folks, and to dispel any myths about, like, for my group, Latinx people, that that you'll somehow get in trouble, or you know, if you go and vote, or you'll get arrested, or whatever the myths are around that, and maybe to send in your vote, right? So the kind of education around that, and then for connection to other folks, you know, whether it's inside or outside of Souls. And then we also talked, I think it's on our little sheet here, about publishing. And so I'm going to call out to Dr. Quezada and Reymundo, who are amazing scholars, and Reyes is a very, you know, published author and has put out a lot of really important books and literature. And maybe it's time for us to get together and write about this collectively as students, faculty, staff in Seoul. So, and I don't know if there's other things our group wants to add.
I think you captured it beautifully, Dr. Estrada. I especially love the idea about leaning on the younger generations to really move things forward. And then with publishing, so it really brought to mind the idea as social justice, and you know, for all the doc students and the grad students and any students, let's get YPAR going, youth participatory action research, and really mobilize our youth and write it up and publish it and really double down on academia and on the energy that younger folks bring to this work. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Okay, we're moving on to group six. Group six, do we have anybody?
I'll go for it since we didn't really decide in the group, and it seems like most of the facilitators are speaking. So group six was Suzanne, Genevieve, Dr. Quezada, senior, and myself. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, and please add something. You know, I definitely don't want you to feel like I'm speaking for everything we said. Some of the things we did talk about echoed a lot of what others were talking about, especially looking at that idea of waking up and how, you know, it seems like people are both waking up to the realities of racism that have, you know, longstanding been a part of this nation and the world. But also on the other side of that people are emboldened to act out very overtly and racistly. But we start talking about kind of the middle, and folks are talking about some of their experiences either in family or smaller groups of people, you know, being neutral or just not really understanding how to have conversations around race. So we start talking about, well, what can we do to facilitate that? And so that's where our first action came, is to continue to have conversations with those close to us and in circles that we enter, and being open to genuine, vulnerable dialogue, expressing how we are hurt by racist actions and statements, and really trying to help others. We talked about different ways, one of just turning arguments on themselves. And you're saying, oh, you know, like Quezada brought up a really good point, was saying that sometimes he would sit with colleagues of his that are more conservative, and they'd say, yeah, we should send everybody back to their countries. And he said, yeah, I agree. And that we should start with the pilgrims. So that's one way to kind of do it. Or other more maybe softer entries, like, you know, Suzanne brought up, well, you know, I don't really, that's really interesting, but I don't see it that way. And trying to create a conversation without right away telling the person, well, you're wrong, right? And then the second thing we talked about was incorporating dialogue within secondary and primary settings. So really making sure that you know, Genevieve doing her student teaching and teacher prep, that we're really consciously, intentionally thinking about how are we dialoguing about oppression, about Black Lives Matter, about racism in those settings, not just in higher ed. And again, if anyone wants to add anything, please do.
Yeah, one on 6.2, we're just thinking in terms of maybe, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years from now, or 20, whether, at least in California, the implementation of now that ethnic studies is going to be required, and is that going to make a difference? A great publication there on a pre and post. How are kindergartners who are starting in 2021, you know, when they graduate 12 years later, is there a difference in terms of their attitudes towards that? And then the other issue in terms of even ourselves putting us in places where we're not comfortable. And I mentioned, you know, yeah, I go visit this conservative friends more to find out, one, what are their thoughts, and also how can I either re-educate them, or on my way from Redlands to San Diego, when I drive, I usually hear KFI or I watch Fox News. And it's not because when I have friends that sit with me like, what are you doing? Well, it's not because I support their ideals, but it's more, what do I need to know in order to combat the ideals that they're perpetuating? Whether, you know, because they've got whatever millions of listeners. So that's who we have in society. That's the way they're thinking. So how do we combat those thoughts?
Thank you, Dr. Quezada. Also very important thing to look at is also all sides of the issues to see where people stand. Because how can we forge a conversation of understanding if we don't understand where we're coming from and our points of view and what is motivating us to support the ideas that we are in fact are informing our votes. So thank you so much for bringing that to the forefront. I believe there is no Group 7. Thank you very much, Group 6. And in this point, I believe, appreciate all the groups that contributed. I appreciate everyone who shared. Thank you so much for really honoring this space.
There is a Group 8.
Oh, there is a Group 8. Oh my, for heaven's sakes, I'm sorry. Group 8. Sorry.
This is Michelle. I would like to thank Group 8 for allowing me to participate. Melissa, Rachel, Patricio, and Aaron. We have some of our comments. We posted them on the action plan, but we really talked about our positions and how our positions within themselves are positions of power. And even though the conversations that we might have might not be comfortable, that's not the point. A lot of times we cater to people's politeness. We want them to feel okay. And we have to understand that we've been put in different positions, whether it is a student, whether it is a faculty member, PhD student, whatever. We are put in a position to, do that good trouble, right? And we also talked about the metaphor of the mirror and how in order to be awakened, we also have to understand how all of us are interconnected. How, as we look at our past and as we look into our future, we all have to look at each other through the eyes of humanity and see how we're all connected. We also talked about responsibility and action. So it's great to have these positions, but positions without action means nothing. So even as a PhD student, we have to look at our responsibility behind those letters. As a student, we also have to look at the power and responsibility within that position also. And we also talked about being aware of the agendas that are going on. Like we talked about Instagram and social media and the algorithms that are out there, right? And how these are agendas that need to be disrupted. And we have to be very aware of systematic agendas and even people in groups agendas, and making sure that, like Dr. Quezada said, sometimes we do have to understand the other position in order for us to have those critical and needed conversations on social justice.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate that powerful last words. Thank you for taking us to the end of our discussions. Group 8, appreciate that. So now I am going to turn it over to Dr. Suzanne Stolz, Assistant Professor of Special Education in the Department of Learning and Teaching, to lead us in our closing remarks. Dr. Stolz.
Hi there, thank you. I want to thank the organizers of the event for asking me to offer closing remarks. And I also want to thank everyone here for spending this time together and participating. This week, I've heard from a number of students that it was a particularly challenging week for a lot of people, that the weight of assignments and Zoom meetings combined with what's going on in the world has felt really overwhelming. And I too have felt tired at the beginning of a day, so I can relate to that. And even though we're tired, we all showed up for each other this afternoon, had some real discussion, likely hoping to draw energy and guidance from one another. Our speaker, Reymundo Quezada, shared his work for social justice and is thinking about the potential of ending racism. He talked about the history of state violence and encouraged us in our work. Our breakout discussions gave us a chance to imagine what unity for justice can look like and to consider ways folks can act against racist and unjust systems. These conversations are helping us consider how to hold the weight of an ugly reality, a country built on racism, global oppression, and continuing threats to democracy. And at the same time, holding enough hopefulness to act, to care for each other, to teach, to counsel, to lead. So I see those as the two things we're trying to balance here while we're all tired and overwhelmed. So the authors that we read to prepare for this have left me with two vivid images that stick with me as I process these ideas and feelings. One, which Anna has already mentioned, is Kendi's use of his own cancer experience as an analogy. Honest recognition of the problem, as difficult as it is really necessary for life, for continuing life, for improving life. And two, the second image is the burning house. I've previously thought about police violence and other racist and racial injustices as our house being on fire and needing immediate action. But Cornel West, he responds to those who say we should just burn it down or help burn it down. And he says, no, you don't want to burn down the house when your babies are in there. You don't want to burn down the house when your mother is in there. And that felt really real to me and felt like, something I can hang on to for continuing to continuing to show up and continuing to have difficult conversations. So those images are powerful for me and summarize for me why we're meeting. We must recognize the harm of racism and oppression and come together to care for people. I encourage you all this weekend to get some rest, to tend to yourselves so that you continue this work. You have the energy to continue this work in the long run. So thank you all for being here and thanks for the conversation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stolz. It was a gift to have you here and for the summary that you really put into today. Zulema?
Yeah, so as we move into the month of October, we decided to do something a little bit different given the really tense moments right now, the anxiety building up to the election, the current events. I think to push people into having another discussion is almost impertinent, it seems. So we want to give people a space to just breathe and process. And what we're inviting folks to do is to participate in creating a digital community mosaic where we all get an opportunity. And this is open for everyone. It's open for anyone who wants to put something together in the form of a tile. And we're going to use the platform Canva for folks who might be familiar with that. And we provided the appropriate links to take you directly there when we send out the flyer. And basically what it is everybody can create a sort of tile that responds to the question that we're posing, which is, how do you envision the change we need? And when we thought about events for the month of October, we were looking at political action, given that the elections were coming up. But again, we decided maybe right now it's a time to hope and imagine and think about what we can do and where we can go with all the work that we've been doing. So whatever happens in the elections, we will always have a space, a sort of memorial for ourselves to come back and remind ourselves that we are in fact a community, that we are together in this work, and to not lose heart and to continue with this work moving forward. So movements are coming in, they fizzle out, but to know that we're still going to be here continuing in this work, and we invite you to join us and in our resolve and to keep walking together.
All right, so go ahead, you have this one too.
Yes. Oh, so we have a survey. So if you want to scan the QR code that's on the screen, or I believe we have the link in, yes, we do, in the chat box. Yes, so the survey will also take you to a few questions about whether you would like to participate in the Community Mosaic activity, and it will link you, we'll collect your email and all that good stuff so that we can be sure to make sure that we send you the correct information for upcoming events. And that will conclude our session for this. Dr. Jez?
I was just going to say, if you fill out the survey form, then I will be sending a summary of what we discussed today with some of the evidence. And then, of course, please visit our website. We're continually adding to it. Adon is continually adding to it with any resources and information. And then, of course, next events, and then also suggested events when we hear of some good things happening around campus. And you are welcome to share this information with other people as well. So thank you. And have a wonderful rest of your Friday evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.